In the old skies, before we had the precession of equinoxes and Aries was really lined up with Aries, now it isn't, but it was then, the large dipper, the big bear, was lined up with the constellation Cancer, the mother bear. And the little dipper, baby bear, was lined up with the sign of Aries. And the way Wendy explains it is that if you look at a bear, a mother bear, basically a mother bear is the only one that raises her young. There is no father bear because, in fact, if a male bear comes around a young bear, they will usually kill it. And the first thing about a mother bear that's rather unique and interesting is that she can be inseminated with the sperm of the male bear, but not necessarily fertilize the egg until two things happen. Number one, she reaches a certain level of fat in her body. Second is that she finds a suitable place to hibernate so that she can be comfortable while she's going through the winter. And it's not until then that she's able to fertilize the egg. So basically, it's almost like self-fertilization. The second point she makes is that as the mother bear has her children and they grow, she's with them for quite a long time. She's with them for 2 years, in other words, 2 winters where she dens with them. And she's very loyal and devoted, much like a Cancer might be with their children. And what happens, though, is on the second winter, or about the 26th month usually, what happens is when they come out of the den, she quite suddenly will turn on her young and literally abandon them or shoo them up a tree, which is quite startling to the young because they're thinking, what's going on? You know, our mother was so good to us, now she's leaving us behind, and she leaves. She just leaves. And they say that a baby bear, when it's crying for its mother, is one of the most horrible, horrible sounds that you can hear. Now, she does that because she really has to become the devouring mother at this point so that they can become adults, something that the animal kingdom has more of an awareness of than we do as humans. And in the old cultures, what used to occur is that the tribes that worship the bear would look for these abandoned, vulnerable baby bears and befriend them and bring them into the tribe and treat them like a pet and wait for them to become full-blown adult bears. At that point, and this is a rather gruesome story, but there was a reason for it. They would quite suddenly, again, like the mother bear, except this time it was physically violent, they would attack and skin the bear alive. The bear eventually would die, and eventually they would eat the meat of the bear, becoming warriors like the bear. Now, what is the point of that story? Well, if we're looking at the baby bear as being Aries, and when we do the talk on Aries, we talk about the wounding that's important for each Aries to become the warrior. We need to, in this case, look at the mother bear and look at how sometimes mother or the energy of mother or life-sustaining forces sacrifice themselves for further life. In other words, refertilization. And basically that's the symbology when we look at the ancient bear cults. You know, one thing dies so that something else is born. And so there, again, are those two sides of the sign of Cancer. We see a lot of other stories. We see famous mythological mothers, goddesses, always having their child who maybe they weren't the best goddess in the world in terms of doing things for other people, but they were always very devoted to their children. Again, a very deep mother kind of energy. And the last story to look at, and this is actually not my story again, this is Michael Mayer's, who's a very well-known astrologer in Berkeley, California, is the Cancer constellation, the crab constellation in the sky. Why is it there? Well, the way the story goes, as Michael Mayer puts it, is that the crab was Hera's ally, and Hera was Zeus's wife. And what happened is she didn't really like Hercules very much. Hercules was Zeus's son, not her son, and she had sent him on these 12 labors that were torturous and hoping that he would die at one of the points of the labors. And he didn't. And at one point in one of the stories, Hercules is battling the vicious Hydra, who if you cut her head off, she grows 2 in return. And she's pretty tricky, but he's a very good warrior and he's good at fighting it off. And so what Hera decides to do is to send the crab, her ally, in to nip at Hercules' heels while he's fighting the Hydra so that he's distracted and that at one point he can be bitten by the Hydra and perish. Well, the poor little crab keeps trying and trying and trying, and he just can't seem to get anywhere. And as the story basically goes, Hercules has had it with this little irritating ally, and he stomps and smashes the crab to death. And for honor for helping Hera, she places the crab in the sky as a constellation, which falls under the constellation of Cancer. Now, the way Michael Mayer states it, and I think this is quite good, is if we look at the Hydra, who each time you cut her head off, she grows 2 heads, she may be the principle of obsession or compulsive behavior. who Hercules is battling. The crab, which is Cancer, which is the feeling nature, and we're talking about feeling and sensitivity, is trying to enter into Hercules' realm. In other words, if you allow the feeling nature, the emotional nature, to come into the obsessive path, it'll stop the obsessive behavior. But what happens is he stomps the sensitive, emotional crab, and the obsessive compulsive behavior continues. And so, again, the principle of Cancer is the sign of sensitivity, allowing it in, even though sometimes it may hurt, like the crab's claw. Now, when we talk about the stories and we talk about the way the sign of Cancer is, we really need to blend this all together and bring it into what we call the houses. There are 12 houses in the horoscope, or fields of experience. And this is basically putting Cancer at the beginning of the horoscope, as you would if you had Cancer rising. For some Cancer sun signs, this may work. It may not work for others. But there are some general characteristics we need to really look at. If we start with the sign of Cancer in the first house, which is always the identity and the physical body, we have been talking a lot about all the qualities and traits of Cancer, the physical characteristics. First house shows when you first meet somebody what your immediate impression might be. Physically, you look at them, how they express themselves. Anybody who has Cancer rising especially would be somebody who in the beginning may be rather shy or standoffish a little bit with you, a little bit like Taurus, but not as cut off, perhaps. They might be very sweet looking when you look at them, like this luminescent skin, and they may not be saying much, but there's a feeling of safety with them. And this is very important to remember, that if somebody has a lot of Cancer in the horoscope or Cancer rising, when you first meet them or encounter them, even if you don't know them, there is this feeling of safety that immediately hits you, which makes you trust them implicitly and tell them all your deepest and darkest secrets. And of course, being a Cancer rising, they're going to listen to this because they're a nurturing principle. If we move to the second house is always the house of not only our resources, in other words, how we spend our money, or how we make, not necessarily how we make money, but how we spend it. Our values is a very important piece of the second house, as well as our skills. We can put the sign of Leo here, which would suggest that there's a tremendous amount of luck, because Leo is a very lucky sign for people who have Cancer rising in terms of resources and skills. Their basic values are, since Leo rules the sun and it rules love, to be loving. There's a pretty much a basically pure, loving nature that comes out of Cancer personalities. They do very, very well in any industry, or they're very skillful, shall we say, in any industry that they shine in, or like Leo, or that can be very dramatic, like the arts or music or movies or showmanship. You see a lot of Cancer individuals either loving movies to go watch them, or being involved in the movie industry. Cancer is one of the signs, like Pisces, that's very much indicated when you look at the movie industry or producers or actors. Usually they'll have some strong, especially actors or actresses, lots of times there'll be a strong moon in the horoscope, because there's also a sense, the moon represents the pulse of the public. They somehow are able to hook into the emotions of the public. If you move to the third house is the sign of Virgo. And the third house is always the house that shows how we communicate and how we process thought, as well as it indicates our relationship with brothers and sisters and relatives, not mothers and fathers, but relatives or peers. The third house, if we put Virgo here, would suggest that they're rather analytical thinkers. Virgo is a rather analytical and a rather practical thinker. Cancer people generally are pretty practical thinkers. They judge, they edit, they figure out, well, if we do this, this will happen, this will be the repercussions. So that's why they can be rather good strategists in terms of business, because they have a way of having an orderly way of thinking. They really like the bottom line of how it's going to turn out. When they communicate with you, it's in a very usually loving way, and it's in a very, shall we say, way that has humility about it. That's one thing about Cancers. When they speak with you, there's a humility about them that allows you to allow them in. It would suggest that you may be critical. Virgo can be a critical sign of your brothers and sisters, or that they may be critical of you. It may suggest that your view of your brothers and sisters is that they're quite bright, they're quite intellectual, even though perhaps you may not think you are. They may view you as that, so therefore it is from their perspective. It may suggest that you have picky relatives or picky brothers and sisters, because Virgo can be the sign of being a little too judgmental or a little too picky. It may suggest, since Virgo doesn't always have as good a concept of itself as it should, that you may not always, as a Cancer person, think that your ideas are that good, when in fact they may be far more thorough than you believe they are. You are a thorough bookkeeper, a thorough accountant. Usually people who have Virgo in this house will be people who have their books in order, and if the IRS ever audited them, they would be able to find exactly what they needed at any request. And so it is a very organized way of thinking. If we go to the fourth house of the horoscope, the fourth house is always the indicator of the early home life as a child. In other words, the roots that you came from. It shows all the family members that came before you, even though you might not have known them. Traditionally, the fourth house of the horoscope in the natural zodiac is associated with Cancer, and it represents the mother and how you saw her and what she was like. There are different belief systems. In England, they believe that the fourth house is the house of the father. It depends. There's a constant argument going on in astrology as to which is which, but the bottom line is the best way to view it is, who did you consider as an individual to be your primary nurturer? That would be your fourth house. That would be the parent. Now, in this case, we can put the sign of Libra, or some people call it Libra, here. Would suggest, first of all, as far as homes go, in terms of your adult life as well as a childhood life, that you like a nice home that has a kind of balance to it. Usually a lot of blues and greens, because Libra likes blues and greens, and it gives a serene kind of calm feeling to the environment. It would suggest that your experience of your mother, or perhaps your father, usually the mother, was rather passive or fair. That's the other way to look. They were fair with you, that they saw both sides, that they didn't take sides with the children. It would suggest, another side of Libra, that you might have viewed family members as being a little lazy or a little laid back or a little procrastinating. It may suggest that you have a family root of people who were in the legal system or in the justice system, since Libra rules legal and justice systems. It may suggest that your mother might have been a person who was good counsel for you, because Libra is the representation of Athena, who is the counselor for the gods. So there's a lot of things going on here, which suggest that there was basically a sophistication about this parent, that they had a rather refined quality about them, and they passed that on to you in terms of your adult life. And that it may not have been nurturing for you physically, and Cancer does require the food and the cuddling and all that, but it may have been quite nurturing mentally, because Libra is a very intelligent sign, and it would suggest that one of those parents was quite bright and quite intelligent, and that is something you did take with you from your childhood. If we go to the fifth house is the house where we can put the sign of Scorpio, another water sign, which is the most powerful, also the most compulsive, obsessive sign of the zodiac. So if the fifth house is the house of your children, or how you deal in love and love affairs, it would suggest you're probably quite passionate, and that the children that you birth, either children of your body, which are your literal children, or the children of your mind, which are your creations, are very passionate, come from your soul, that there's a tremendous drive to create. There's a tremendous drive to create by taking something old that's sort of run down and transforming it into something new and beautiful. There is a black and white attitude towards children. There's a black and white attitude towards love. Either you love them or you don't. There is no gray. I mean, that's literally what Scorpio is about in the fifth house. It would suggest that you put a lot of energy into love, perhaps more energy into love affairs than you do into literal marriage. It would suggest that if you look at the fifth house, which is Scorpio, which also is ruled by Pluto, which rules the banks and monies, and this is the house of speculation, that you might be very good at taking risks financially, that you could do very, very well from investing on a speculative venture. If we go to the sixth house is always the house that shows health issues that need to be addressed. It's also the house that shows the kinds of employees or the kinds of work environments we find ourselves in, or how we like to work, the methodology we like using when we work. You can put the sign of Sagittarius right here. Now, Sagittarius is a free-thinking fire sign, which would suggest that if you're a Cancer person, you're going to like a long leash with your job. You're not going to want to be necessarily, unless there's other parts in your horoscope that indicate this, you're not going to want to be tied down behind a desk 9 to 5. That one of your greatest gifts may be the ability to sell, not only sell, but sell people dreams and visions, because Sagittarius is the visionary thinker. It might suggest that you could be a good teacher. Sagittarius is a great teacher, and on the sixth house of work would suggest that even if you're not quote unquote officially teaching people, that you may teach the people with whom you work. It would suggest, as far as health, Sagittarius rules the circulation in the body. That again, this is another part of the body that needs to be watched. Regular walking, hard for a Cancer to do because they like their soft couches, but regular walking could help them. Games of tennis could help them. It would suggest, walking, running, jogging might be some of the areas that might be really good to keep your health going. It would suggest that you probably would like spicy foods because it's a fire sign on the 6th house, shows the kinds of foods you like, especially exotic foreign kinds of foods. This is a typical, Cancers like all kinds of foods, not only American, but, French and German and Mexican and Chinese foods. So they're not usually picky eaters. They'll pretty much eat anything. If we go to the 7th house of the horoscope, that's always the house that indicates long-term partnerships like marriage and legal business partnerships. And also the kinds of partners we attract to us. Now, we put the sign of Capricorn here, which is the complete opposite of the sign of Cancer. Capricorn is the very reserved, very ambitious, very cool, very detached sign of the zodiac. It's hardworking. It would suggest that it's tough, that you would attract to you a real stable, tough thinking, ambitious. You would be attracted to that kind of person who perhaps balances out your super emotional nature, somebody that is a little bit more able to deal with their emotions, at least seemingly so on the surface, and handle them. It would suggest that perhaps you might do better to marry later in life than earlier in life, because Capricorn is a sign that grows later in life and develops later in life. It might suggest that you might be attracted to older people. You might marry, if you're a man, a woman that's older, if you're a woman, a man that's older. It might suggest that you're attracted to people that might have been sort of like your father, because Capricorn is one of the archetypes of father. It might suggest that the types of partners you attract to you are rather stoic, cool, detached, organized, businesslike. That when people know them, they need to know them for a while before they truly open up. And it may be that type of personality is what you need to balance out all the emotional fluctuating that you consistently go through as a Cancer. It would suggest, too, that regardless of what happens in the life, that if you're married to someone or hooked up with someone on a long-term basis, that they will be able to weather the storm with you, because Capricorn can endure tremendous amounts of discord or difficulties, more than perhaps most of the other signs of the zodiac. If we move to the 8th house, the 8th house is the house that represents the salary we make, the money that we attract to us from other people. They say that the 8th house is the house that also shows our attitude towards death, birth, life, transformation. And you would be rather open because Aquarius is on this house, and Aquarius is rather avant-garde and progressive. It would suggest that you would be better off in terms of investing or working with investments with groups or any industries that involve Aquarius kinds of activities like New Age or electronics or computers or commercial housing or commercial development or large projects or large deals, something that's innovative and on the coming up in the future. In other words, investing in the future, this is a good thing and this is why they usually do very well, because they have a pulse on what's coming before a lot of the other groups of people do. It would also suggest that you have a rather open and rather non-judgmental view of death. Maybe you have unique views of death. Maybe you have unique views. Maybe you're one of the first people before reincarnation became more of a common belief that truly believed in that. If we move to the 9th house, the 9th house always shows our philosophy of life, our beliefs. Shows our education in terms of college or higher education. It suggests perhaps the ability we have to put together large conceptual ideas and use them. And we can put the very spiritual, very old soul sign of Pisces at this position, which would suggest that there's a basic serving quality to the belief system that you're willing to sacrifice if you're believing in something that you think really is the way things should be. It would suggest that you are very mystical in your thinking and that you would do very well perhaps in any industry or career that may involve mysticism or working with religion or faith or giving faith or encouraging faith in other people, inspiring other people. It would suggest that there's a tremendous amount of sensitivity and that when you go for a higher education, that you basically get it through osmosis, not through the words, but through taking all the things that are said to you and putting it through your own process of thinking and inventing your own thought. It would suggest that there might have been some sorrow in education. Perhaps you didn't complete the education you began, or that you began one thing and it really wasn't what you really wanted to do, and that maybe perhaps later in life you go further and you study the more artistic pursuits like the arts or music or dance or theater, etc. It would suggest, too, that when you travel, there's a lot of help for you on the road because Pisces is a very helpful sign and that you would benefit tremendously spiritually from travels. If we move to the 10th house, the 10th house is always the house of our career and what we came here to do. And the sign of Aries, the very first sign of the zodiac, goes right here. Aries is new thinking, warrior thinking. So usually you'll see Cancers in business for themselves. They don't like working for other people because other people aren't going to be as quick as they are. And if it's an old kind of business, they're not interested. If it's a new kind of business, they're going to be very interested. Lots of times it may be a business that, for some of the signs that were ruled by Aries, you see guns and surgeons, and you see warriors or gamesmanship or mind idea. In other words, person who works with their head like a consultant who has to come up with really new and innovative ideas to make things work. These are some of the industries that work very, very well for Cancer rising people. It would suggest, if this is the house also of the opposite parent, usually the father, that you might have been severed from the father because Aries is little bear who got cut away from his mother, or that the father was very busy in the world doing his warrior thing and wasn't necessarily available to you, leaving you mostly with mother, which would stand true for Cancers because they're associated with the mother. And it might suggest, too, that your view of father was that he was impatient. If you saw mother as this house, your view of mother might have been she was impatient, but that in fact they were delightful in the fact that they were always ready for a new adventure. If we go to the 11th house is the house of our goals and the kinds of friends we attract to us. And you have the very stable sign of Taurus here, which does suggest that your friends are very stable and usually very fixed and opinionated, but there for you whenever any storms hit, they're always there and that you are there for them. It would suggest that your friends are extremely important to you, not only for the emotional return, but that they would be very good at hooking you up with the right people to bring opportunities for your work and your business to you, because Taurus is the sign of money and it is ruled by Venus, which is the power to attract to you what you need. It would suggest that whatever your goals are, you have the power with the sign of Taurus here to attract to you that which you need, to attract to you funding, to attract to you friends and relatives that'll help, or potential partners that will really work with you rather than against you. And that it may take time to develop the goals, but since Taurus rules builders lots of times, or one of the signs that rules builders, that you will slowly but surely figure out a methodology to figure out your goals for the future. Now we move to the very last house of the horoscope, which is the very last place we move through before we begin anew in Cancer. And it's an important house because it is also many times considered to be also our blind spot. And at the same time it's our blind spot, it's also our greatest gift too. We can put the sign of Gemini here. Now Gemini is a very mental, very quick, very bright sign of the zodiac, and it can easily be distracted, but it has a lot to do with trying to integrate emotions and intellect, which is a big struggle for Cancer since they are so emotional. One of the things they have to learn in this life, which seems to be unattainable sometimes because they are coming from such a deep, nurturing level, is bringing the thoughts in to balance out what the heart is saying. And this is why we call the 12th house the blind spot. That's the lesson of Gemini, is it to integrate the emotions as well as the intellect. It would also suggest that your spiritual gifts or your treasure chest might be the fact that you have a very good intellect, that there's a good writing ability, speaking ability, analyzing ability, and listening ability. And that, in fact, if you were to give yourself some time, and the 12th house really has a lot to do with giving yourself time, that you would be surprised at how many wonderful things might come out of the expression part of yourself as a Cancer. It would suggest, too, since the 12th house has a lot to do with early childhood memory as well as some people believe in it, past life memory, that in fact you might have not been responsible in a past life, because the negative side of Gemini is being irresponsible or never growing up, like Peter Pan, who says he'll never grow up. He doesn't want to grow up. And that the memory may be that you don't want to grow up, but the reality is, because you're a Cancer, is that you're here to take care of others. And so there's always this urge to kind of go back and be taken care of, rather always being the caretaker. So what we're basically saying here is the successful way of operating as a Cancer in the world is to work on keeping the intellectual growing as well as the emotional, and working on keeping those two things in balance. Because By keeping those two things in balance as a Cancer personality, you can be nurturing, but you can also be effective. So basically what we're looking at here as we move back to the beginning, the sign of Cancer, is the fact that if we take all of the experiences we've been talking about, if we look at the moon as being the ruler of Cancer, the moon representing the home life or the mother or the early nurturing principle, if we look at the sign of Cancer as being very concerned with family and food and security issues, and security is very definitely what comes up here, the basic theme would seem to be then that the theme or the life challenge, shall we say, of Cancer is about going home again. Now, we know we can't really go home again. No one can go home again. But what we can do in our life from beginning to the end of our life is wherever we are at whatever time and place is that we establish and make a home in whatever place we're in, whether we're single, whether we're married, whether we're living with other people, that we make a home. And in our jobs, in our place of living, in our recreation, that every place we go, we make a home. And by doing that, it brings the feeling of going home again without the irresponsibility of becoming a child again. And that's the gift of Cancer.
Hello, this is Georgia Stathis. You've been listening to our archived series, Myths and Signs of the Zodiac, and we thank you. If you liked what you heard and you'd like to know more and hear more, please go to our website at starcycles.com, where you can find an assortment of available tools, pieces of information, and things that you can use in your own practice or in your own study of astrology. Again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.